Welcome to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guest today is Scott Harris, a retired educator from the city of Thunder Bay. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you, Steve.
So, Scott, let's start back in the day. Where did you grow up? Tell us a little bit about your early life.
Okay, grew up in Dorian, just up the road. Suburb of Hercot, they say.
I don't know. I think the folks in Dorian would say Hercot's
Or
a
vice
suburb.
versa. So a rural life. Didn't live on a farm, but lived next to a farm and got involved with farming as a summer job kind of thing, helping milk cows, etc. And so that was all good. Lots of fishing and hunting and doing what you do out in the rural areas.
My grandson just took me fishing kind of on the other side of organized Dorian last month.
Okay.
It was beautiful. It was, you got nice flat fields and then you got these mountains, mountains.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we have a camp on the Wolf River in one of our on the old family homestead. And it's quite mountainous, but the Wolf River itself is a gorgeous place. Waterfalls and hiking trails and sometimes good fishing.
So what did you do around education? Did you stay in town or?
Yes, once I was out of Dorian Consolidated, I went to Hammarskjöld High School. So we got on the bus at 7 in the morning, got to school in time to start school, and then immediately after school got on the bus and went home again and was home by 5 o'clock. So did that for 5 years. And we just had our 50th anniversary of our graduation last year from good old Hammarskjöld High School.
We're about the same age. I went to my 50th in May.
Oh yeah. And then it was on to university and my mother's encouragement. Took philosophy and English, didn't know what to do with it. Somebody said, why don't you go try teaching? And I went up to the northern communities and did some teaching up there. And then...
In Northern Ontario or where?
Yeah. Heron Bay the first time, and then Gull Bay, and then up along the CN tracks at Collins. So that was with Canada Manpower upgrading.
Okay.
So that was kind of a baptism by fire. I had, it was adult education, so I had students from grades 1 to 10. But I didn't know any difference, so it was quite fine. And then I got a job at the Lakehead Board, and I stayed with them for another 32 years as a teacher, grades 1 to 8, and then a school administrator. The icing on the cake. Yeah.
So you ended up, were you a principal then? Is that what that means?
Yeah.
Administrator?
I was a principal at Ogden Community School over in the East End, and that really was a wonderful experience. Good way to finish off my career.
And so you retired when?
2005. And then did some, I sort of transitioned out. I did some supply principal work for a few years, and then I got interested in other things.
So, I don't know, when I grew up, the principal was, the step down from God. And I thought, wow, they're like the smartest person in the school, and the school's like the center of the community. And so, do you have reflections from kind of those years as an educator?
Yeah.
That you could share a few thoughts?
Well, it was we went through a lot of changes over the years, and curriculum changes, for example. So going from the P1J1 document back in the 70s, that sort of gave teachers free rein to experiment with the curriculum, to nowadays where it's a highly prescribed curriculum with EQAO testing in grades 3, 6, and 10. So it's very different now. And the idea is that across Ontario, that all children will have a uniform curriculum and there won't be gaps. So, which is very different than P1J1 days, where teachers were at liberty to try different approaches. And
so, this is a topic unto itself, but from your experience, so you had kind of a share in both, how do you feel about them now?
My daughter's a teacher, so she keeps me up to speed. A lot of good things happening. Cooperative learning, and of course computers are figuring in hugely. In the old days, rote learning was a huge factor, memorizing this, that, and the other thing, but now knowledge, acquisition of knowledge is accomplished in other ways. And it's more about learning processes, teaching children how to access information, how to organize it, how to share it. So it's a whole different approach to teaching, which is a good thing. And the computer is taking care of a lot of the mechanical kinds of things that we used to really emphasize.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that's all good. And part of what's happening with education is the ability to manage the wealth of information that's out there, and how to help kids handle it in healthy and productive ways. So, and there's some dangers there for sure. So, the new sex ed curriculum is currently a hot topic.
Indeed.
For example, and teachers in general are quite keen to accept the fact that computers have changed our whole approach to education, and not just academically, but also socially, and that they have a role to play there in helping kids sort through that. So our fingers are crossed that maybe the new curriculum will be won't be shelved.
Well, I think I've got to go back to school because I need some help sorting through all that information on the darn computer. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's like overwhelming.
When you asked me to change my PowerPoint into JPEG files, that was a panic attack situation.
So, you become a retired guy, you had extra time on your hands. What caught your interest?
Well, I started having grandkids, and that can tweak your interest for sure. So that made me start thinking about their future. And my son sent me a book. It was called The Weather Makers by Tim Flannery. It was about the effect that man was having on the climate of the planet. And I got really interested in that. And
Now, how long ago was that?
That was 2005, just after I retired.
Okay.
At that time, Environment North was showing An Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore. And that had all kinds of interesting graphics that proved the point that Flannery was making. So then I started looking around to see, well, what's happening locally in terms of environmental issues. And Environment North was the group that had shown that film to 5,000 students, mostly, over the course of a month in 2005. And I got involved with Environment North and started finding out about their accomplishments and their interests, and I've been a part of that group ever since.
So, we just have about 30 seconds left for our first segment here. But I'm wondering a little bit about you growing up in the rural area and the link there to kind of interest in the environment.
So we continue to enjoy it. We have a summer camp on the Wolf, as I said, and so we're out there a lot. And we're off the grid, and we're totally free of radio, TV, electronics, everything. And it is just so sweet to be able to not hear electronic noise. So
On that note, we're going to take a short break, and we're going to come right back and find out more about what's happening in the environment. Welcome back to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guest today is Scott Harris, a retired educator from Thunder Bay and the Lakehead District School Board. So Scott, in the last section we were really talking about your interest in the environment and getting involved with Environment North. This is a dozen years ago or so. What were some of the things they were working on that interested you?
Global warming and climate change has been a long-standing area of interest. Going back to the 80s, nuclear waste has been an issue for a long time, and that issue is resurfaced now as the atomic energy people are looking for a safe disposal site for their high-level nuclear waste. So back in the 80s, Atikokan was chosen as a likely spot, and Environment North and others thought that we didn't really know enough about safe transport and storage of nuclear waste to be doing that. Let's leave it on site until we know more about it. So Graham Saunders was one of the people who, for example, rallied people around that cause, let's slow down, and got 22,000 signatures on a petition, which was pretty extraordinary for a relatively sparsely populated area like ours. So, so jumping forward a bit here, in 2004, Syncrude, an American energy company, wanted to put a petroleum coke generating station on our waterfront. It had a lot of support from Chamber of Commerce, City Council, First Nations. Anyways, a grassroots group led by Environment North, Christy Radburn was a key player there, asked the government to ask for an environmental assessment. And eventually, Gord Miller, who was the Environment Commissioner at that time, agreed that that was a reasonable thing to do. And so that company eventually went away. So I think without that pushback, that may not have happened. And that was really significant in a number of ways. First of all, that petroleum coke generating station is probably one of the most polluting facilities on the planet. In 2012, we had a major flood that inundated our ability to get rid of flood water, for example.
Right, the east end of town was really hit hard.
If that had been on the waterfront at the time, we may have very well ended up with another North Harbor situation, and that North Harbor situation is something that goes back a long time. And it has to do with the mercury that's sitting out in the harbor here with a price tag of $90 million to clean up. The third thing is NAFTA. According to NAFTA agreements, if we interfere with a company's right to make money, then it goes to a tribunal, and Canada has had a very poor record in terms of defending itself against that. So in a number of ways, that was an issue that we're all happy nowadays that grassroots group came forward. More recently, the ELA, Experimental Lakes Area, was closed by the Harper government.
No, this is the one out around Kenora area.
Yeah, Vermilion Bay.
Vermilion Bay.
And they have a tremendous reputation for helping industry solve problems with regard to acid rain, with regard to phosphates in our rivers and river systems that are ending up in lakes and causing algae blooms and dead zones. Mercury poisoning in hydro dams. Just any number of, there's something like 50 experiments going on there at the present time. And so, for example, we don't have phosphates in our detergents anymore because of what they discovered.
No kidding, there's like a link back to the Experimental Lakes program.
And the same thing with acid rain. Because of the discoveries they made with regard to acid rain, many industries now have scrubbers, electrostatic precipitators on their smokestacks that takes out most of the sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxide from the air. And so that's a huge, huge accomplishment. How we deal with mercury in hydro dam reservoirs has been a huge issue, meaning that people can't eat the fish out of there because of the mercury going up to the food chain. So now they are able to help hydro people do it differently. You don't just flood the land and have all that decaying vegetation creating methyl mercury. And so we have a lot of run of river hydro projects now, for example. So those are just a few examples of what they've been involved in over the years. So lately it's had to do more with pipelines.
Well, so on that Environmental Lakes program, so the federal government was trying to shut it down. what was it that Environment North did to kind of bring that into the public awareness and put political pressure on?
Well, we hosted a number of events, public events, like a press conference at City Hall, where Diane Orahel, who was a doctoral student, put her life on hold, and she had worked there, and she knew the importance of the Environmental Lakes area. She came to Thunder Bay, and we hosted her. And I should say that the Council of Canadians local chapter was a huge factor in this as well, as they are with many projects nowadays. And so we're pretty sure that that pushback right across the country, not just from locally, but from scientists, politicians, and so on. But it took a lot of pushback to reopen that Experimental Lakes area, and now it's up and running and helping industry solve all kinds of problems. So,
which is great. I mean, here there's like a win-win. We're doing science so that we're going to have a better environment, that we're going to have healthier people as a result.
Yeah.
What's the problem?
Yeah. So one of the experiments now, for example, is downstream from cities. We discovered that fish are being feminized. Male fish are being feminized, and what's causing that? And so there was a study done on fathead minnows that showed that the synthetic hormones that go down our sewer systems are getting into the water. They can't filter them out, and so they're causing the feminization of fish, for example. So that's an issue we should be really trying to get a handle on. It's a difficult challenge for sure. But just another example, one of the experiments that's going on there to try to solve a problem that's affecting our environment. So.
So you'd mentioned the Syncrude plant, that really once it had to face an environmental assessment, they kind of packed up their bags and left town.
Yeah, and the reason that they came here in the first place is because Canada had much more lax environmental regulations. But things have tightened up since then, and things like that, I think, have really helped to change things.
So, in a way, Environment North has been, in part, trying to say industry needs to have responsibility for the things that they're putting out into the environment.
Does that sound reasonable to you?
It sounds so reasonable. And like, why the heck doesn't, isn't that the number one priority?
Yeah. So, I mean, we've been treating the environment as a reservoir for sewage, whether it's in the air or the soil or the water, not really thinking about what the aftermath might be, but now we know what the aftermath is, and we can do something about it. At least we can try to do something about it.
Hang on right there, Scott. Please stay with us. We'll be right back and find out what else we can do to kind of help protect our environment. Welcome back to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guest today is Scott Harris, a retired educator from the Lakehead Board of Education. So Scott, we were just talking about really the growing awareness among the public around the pollution of our environment. My little granddaughters, who are 5 and 7, I was over at their house last spring, and they gave me a big lecture about plastic straws. And don't use plastic straws because it kills the fish. Because we end up dumping stuff and it ends up into our waterways. Where do they learn that stuff? Does that come up in school? Are they?
Oh, for sure. There's what's something called a spiral curriculum in school, where you touch on different subjects all the way through school. And so one of them is matter and energy, for example. And a child in grade 1 might learn this, and grade 2 might learn this, and grade 3, but they follow those themes through. And so there's a lot of stuff going on in schools with regard to recycling and growing food, just any number of subjects that impact on the environment.
And thank goodness for that, really, because we need to protect our environment. So pipelines has been a big thing that's been in the talk both in our own backyard and other parts of North America. What has been happening in our area around these issues?
With regard to a number of groups that have sort of coalesced, that's Environment North, Council of Canadians, Ontario Nature, Fossil Free Lakehead, CUSP, Citizens United for a Sustainable Planet. There's been a lot of cross-pollination there. People from one group are belong to the other group as well. So we've put on a number of events over the last decade, actually. So we've had climate change conferences, triggered by some solid science, by the way. The International Panel on Climate Change is very definite about the fact that man is changing the environment. They've even named the new era the Anthropocene, which means man is in control of the environment. Some, in fact, call us the God species because we are in control. And so to dig up something that was produced 300 million years ago, over 60 billion years, and 60 billion years, yeah, and then burn it all at once sounds pretty suicidal to me. But anyways, locally we've our approach has been to prevent any new pipelines that are carrying bitumen. So we do need natural gas. I have natural gas in my home.
Now bitumen is what?
It's a tarry subject that they dig out of the tar sands. So one of the
the Syncrude is up in the tar sands too, aren't they? It was the same crew that was.
I believe they are, but I'm not sure. Anyways, the majority of the tar sands is owned by foreign companies anyways, but they provide jobs for Albertans, so that's the trade-off there. So our idea was that if you are going to abide by the Paris Agreement and reduce our carbon footprint,
which Canada has already signed on to.
Which we've signed on to, then how in the world can we be promoting new pipelines which will make that impossible? And so we've done a number of things locally. We've had marches, we've written letters to the editor, we've lobbied politicians, we've done some fun things. For example, we've written songs about it and had some opportunities to present songs. We did a pipeline walk where we, at 30 below weather, we walked the pipeline and camped overnight, just to draw attention to the fact that to this issue.
That was Thunder Bay up to Nipigon, was it, or where was that?
Yeah, it was out in the Nipigon area. Yeah, so we've had climate walks, sung songs, done a number of things that were actually celebrating the fact that we do have an environment that is worth saving. It's beautiful. So we're in looking at the data and just trying to decide does this really deserve our attention? And when we look at our watersheds here, for example, the Nipigon River, back in the 90s, I don't know if you remember, but there was a mudslide. 300,000 cubic meters of the banks of the Nipigon River slid into the Nipigon River and left the gas pipelines suspended above the riverbank. Bitumen is about 3 to 4 times heavier. And if that had broken and it was bitumen, we never would have cleaned it up. Bitumen, when it mixes with sediments in the river, it sinks to the bottom. It can't be skimmed off like other conventional oil can be. Downstream from there are the Red Rock First Nations, Township of Nipigon, the town of Red Rock, one of the greatest speckled trout fisheries on the planet, the speckled trout fishery. And so without not being able to clean that up, I mean, that would have been just a horrific event. And it's really believable that pipe would have broken. The second thing that happened was the Beardmore explosion. So we don't really think about natural gas too much as something that would destroy the environment as oil would do.
Because it burns more cleanly.
And for example, in the Beardmore explosion, 2.79 billion liters of natural gas escaped into the atmosphere and just went up and joined the great carbon party in the sky. And then it disappeared, and of course it isn't in front of us. And so we don't really think about it too much. Had that been bitumen, oh my goodness. So anyways, because for two reasons, climate change, global warming, and the fact that that would compromise our Paris Agreement. And the second thing was danger to our watershed. So there are 1,850 some watersheds in the impact zone for Energy East. And so we approached City Hall, made a deputation. We lost that argument, by the way. The city agreed that the pipeline was a good idea, with some considerations regarding water crossings and so on. Anyways, Energy East, it finally became so expensive, and part of it was that the pushback from environmental groups and scientists and so on made it more expensive. So, for example, they were going to end in Quebec, and then they decided to go all the way to, because of the whale population in the Gulf, they decided to go to New Brunswick. And it was a rip it and ship it operation. It was not going to provide energy security for Eastern Canada. It would be loaded onto ships and sold to the highest bidder.
Scott, we're out of time. If people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to do that?
My email address is svjharris@tbaytel.net, and I'd be happy to converse with anyone who's interested.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, and thanks to all our viewers. Stay safe and see you again soon.